Hello! In the previous video we talked about analog television demodulation. We talked about some theory, we had a look at some equipment, and we did some experiments. And we finished up that video with a demonstration of this really nice Rohde & Schwarz measurement demodulator. Now there were actually some comments and questions which came in as a result of that, but yeah, it's not like I need any excuses to get this thing out and play with it again. So we're going to try and answer those today. Now additionally, we have something sitting on top of it, and I think you might have a pretty good idea what that might be. So let's get into it. The most exciting development since the last video is the arrival of this manual here. Now I've said this before, but manuals are the #1 struggle that I have on this channel. There are so many things we can do here, but finding the manual often just isn't one of them, and it's just really frustrating. I probably spend more time hunting for these manuals than I do on anything else. There's increasingly viewers who are coming to the rescue here. Over the years, people have sent me some amazing scans of manuals that they have for their equipment, which I also have, and I use those regularly now. Sometimes people have lent me manuals, and sometimes I even just receive a tip about where I can find a manual, and everything is appreciated, and I will always make sure that anything sent in is shared and made available to everybody. I will never try to personally profit from it. Now we have just such an example here today, but before we open this up, let's first do a couple of quality tests just to make sure that this thing is worthy of our time. So let's have a look what we've got here. Now this is actually the manual for the EMFT, which I did briefly mention in the previous video. Now this is the predecessor of the EMFP, which I have on the desk. Now I did speculate in that video that the T was a fairly similar item, and certainly from the exterior of it, it does look like it might be built quite similarly internally. So it's really exciting to have the manual for this here, because we can actually confirm that without having to physically get one on the desk. Now interestingly, it says standard BG only here, but I have seen pictures of System M version 1, so not really sure what to make of that. Now another interesting thing I can see straight away is there's actually a mention of NICAM down here, which that's quite unexpected actually. This would date this manual around about the late 1980s. I think this is probably a much older product than that, so it's possibly possible that this is a newer revision of the manual. So anyway, let's have a look what we've got inside. So there's the thing there, looking certainly a lot more primitive than the item that I have. And we've got descriptions of various other esoteric variations of it, which seem to be quite uncommon. I did Google for those. They don't seem to be something that shows up at auction very often. So the EMFT seems to be the main product here. And we have a block diagram here, which certainly does look quite similar to the EMFP. Now this picture here is interesting. We've got a depiction of another instrument down here. This is a TV digital oscilloscope ODF. Now this is something I didn't really make very clear in the previous video, that these measurement demodulators, they don't do much actual measuring beyond, carrier amplitudes and deviation and what have you. The measuring gets done by something else. Now, Rohde & Schwarz have presented this oscilloscope as an item that maybe you could consider using. Now, I did have a look at this. This seems to be a very rare product. I couldn't actually find many examples of them coming up at auction and what have you, so it seems to be probably maybe not very successful. But yes, this is an insertion signal analyzer. Now, insertion signal analysis, this is something I will cover in a future video, but we're not going to go there today because it's a really big topic, and I would probably have to spend weeks researching it to do it justice. Now, I think this is quite a similar item to the Tektronix VM700 series, which was a very popular product, unlike this Rohde & Schwarz here. But certainly for this type of product, measurement demodulators, Rohde & Schwarz appear to have dominated the market. Now, speaking of Tektronix, they were also in this space as well. They came to the market guns blazing in 1979 with the 1450. Now the 1450, as far as I can tell, is a thoroughly engineered product, and the manual is an absolute work of art. But there is something a little bit unusual about this product. Now, normally I would be talking about the 1450 series, but it was actually just the 1450. It only seems to have been made in a NTSC System M version, which is, is pretty unusual for Tektronix. So normally they would make all the variants of it and push it into every market. But what they actually did instead is made a deal with Rohde and Schwarz to rebrand the EMF series. That's actually the series for which we have the manual for right now. And they even did this for the System M version, which this is a product that Tektronix has already developed. So yeah, there's definitely something funny going on here. This rebadging of demodulators continues by Tektronix. In the late 80s, by the looks of it, we see another rebadged item here. This is not a measurement demodulator, but nonetheless, it's rebadged from Barco by the looks of it. And then in the 1990s, well, mid-90s I think, we get the DS1000 series, which doesn't immediately look like a rebadge, but somebody actually sent me a picture of the inside of one of these some time ago, and we can see, if we look down there, look at that, that's something rather familiar. That's actually the CPU PROM for the Showman 5000 series demodulator, which we looked at in the previous video, so yeah, that's quite funny. So yeah, this thing is basically a Showman 5000 squished into a Tektronix form factor. Now interestingly here, this unit we've got a picture of as a System BG version, and right there is the cosine filter, which I have an empty space for in my unit, so that's what it looks like. And we can see the Broadcast Technologies label on it right there, so yeah, that's an item that was developed here in the UK, so yeah, that's quite interesting. Now over at Philips, the PM5560 was left languishing in the catalogue for 20 years, which probably didn't do them a lot of good in terms of market shares. This is probably a big part of how Rohde and Schwarz took over. But they did eventually come back to the market in about 1996 with the PM5696. Now I don't have one of these, I don't have much information about it either, but at the $20,000 price tag and the very impressive spec sheet as anything to go by, this definitely was not a half measure, and it does look like it sold reasonably well. So there you have it, probably rather unnecessary dive into the incredibly small world of TV test demodulators. Now let's continue with our brochure here. What have we got here? Oh yes. Some specifications here. It's quite nice. Specifications alone can be rather handy in the absence of nothing else. But anyway, we of course do have the full manual here, so we're just going to breeze through it fairly quickly because this is, you know, some people might say this is a bit much sitting here watching a video about a manual, but so certainly for me it's so incredibly rare to see manuals like this that we're going to take the time to have a look at this today. Now the operating instructions section is actually fairly minimal. We've only got about a dozen or so pages there, and that's because, well, operating these things, there's not really all that much to them. We've kind of seen most of all of the operation already in the demonstration, aside from a few more specific things. We'll skip now to the service manuals section. Now this is a really important section. This contains all of the things that we would expect to see on various test points throughout the unit. There's loads and loads and loads of numbers on here and what have you, which is, yeah, this is probably the most useful part of the manual, and certainly it's, from looking at it, it looks like the one that the previous owner has referred to the most. We have various diagrams from network analyzers from different parts of it, which is good. I say I'm not going to get into the details of it because I have scanned this manual. The link to it is in the description, so if anyone is interested, of course you can take a look at it. After that we have this is like a high-level diagrams section here, which is quite handy. So just flip into this. We've got, what have we got here? Power distribution. Now it seems that Rohde and Schwarz got so carried away with the detailed diagrams that they appear to have neglected a good high-level block diagram. So this power supply distribution diagram is what we're going to be working with here. Now we actually have all of the different modules of the unit listed here, and in particular we actually have English names for them because the physical modules sometimes only have German descriptions. So this one's interesting. Grundplatte is actually basic board. That's not what I would have expected that to translate it to. But anyway, when I first received this manual, I took out the detailed sections and compared them against the physical hardware that I have. And I can reveal that this manual is definitely very relevant to the receiver which I have. So the sections which are the same is this one here, the RF section. Now that's the big tuner module, which is in the middle of the unit. The IF section, now this is the demodulator module, which sits on the top, is also the same. This one here, the basic board, is the same. The power supply is also the same, wherever that is on here. So there's it there, is it? But the rest of it is different. So the IEC board is different. Synthesizer, this is the digital control module. And signal board here, I think that's the front panel. That's also different. So yeah, it looks like the EMFP really is kind of like a facelift item of the EMFT. So rather than completely redesigning it, because bear in mind there would be an absolutely staggering amount of engineering in all of the RF parts of this, what Rohde and Schwarz have basically done is said, sod that, let's just go over it and make it look a bit nicer and a bit more modern, just so that we look like we're at least keeping up with the times. And this is something that Philips didn't do. They left this horribly dated PM5560 sitting in the catalogue forever and ever and ever. And I think it's possible that people just looked at that thing and thought, yeah, maybe not. That looks a bit too vintage to be spending our money on. So yeah, that's possibly why Rohde and Schwarz have been able to take over the market here by introducing this in-between model. So let's continue. Now, as we would expect, we have some really nice high-level block diagrams of the various modules contained within this item. Now this one here, I like to call these Uber sheets. This is a massive size of schematic sheet which Rohde and Schwarz appear to have been using, which is 2 A3 sheets in size, in width rather. Very awkward to scan those, a real pain in the ass, but I did get through them all. Another one here, I think this is a similar size one, another huge sheet here, so that's the demodulator, top level diagram. And look at these pages here, they just look so biblical, they're so ancient. I feel like I'm reading the Dead Sea Scrolls here or something. Just, yeah, it's a really vintage feel about them, and it seems to be just these pages that are like that. The rest of the manual looks much newer. It's almost like they've been sitting in storage for a long time or something when they actually put these together. There's another really nice one there, so let's get through these pages. Right, let's get on to number 4. This is the circuit description for the tuner section. So we, at the beginning of each chapter, we've got a good description of how everything works, which that's really handy. And then you get into these huge big schematic sheets that look like they're from a very long time ago. Here's another one there, very nice. But some of them, interestingly, look newer. So that one, there's a kind of white coloured page. It looks like it's been printed much more recently. So maybe they did have some really old sheets sitting around and they just stuffed them into manuals and updated them where necessary. So now we're back to a really old one again. Really interesting. Now, I had a German viewer who emailed me a scan of his lovely vintage Rohde and Schwarz test pattern generator manual just recently, actually. And he actually, somehow or other, had scanned these Uber sheets all in one piece. I have no idea how you would even do that. Certainly, whatever scanner did that, I would love to have that here. So that would have saved me a lot of time. But yeah, that's the kind of schematics section of it, and yeah, it's just really nice, isn't it? Like, if you buy a piece of test equipment these days, you know, you're going to get some half-assed PDF that's just about going to tell you how to use the thing, but yeah, this is just absolutely pornographic. Look at that, gosh. What are we looking at here? Oh, I see, this is the bottom view. Don't normally get one of them. And this is the, that's that oscillator module. There's a nice layout of that. That was the thing I was too afraid to open. Nice to know that we've got some service information for that. And we, of course, you get these parts lists, which you see in pretty much every service manual of the time. And there's the IF section. That's a really good one to have the manual for, because that's probably the most complicated part of this product. So yeah, nice to have all the schematics for that. After that, we have the synthesizer. That's the digital control section, which I say that is actually quite different on this one. But interestingly, it is, if I just pull this out here, it is in the same form factor as the control section in the EMFP. So the unit I have has a module in it that's this size, but it must be completely different, because this one looks like it's basically just built out of a whole bunch of dumb logic tips. So yeah, they've just updated that one bit and the front panel. And it goes on. So now we're into the motherboard section, which is, that's the board that we saw down the bottom of the unit when we did the teardown on it last time. There's quite a lot of stuff going on here. As I said, there's audio processing, various measurements, and it actually looks like we've got some switching stuff down here as well. So yeah, that's unexpected. I say, when I looked at this last time, I had absolutely no idea what this was all about. But yeah, it looks like this is doing just quite a bit more than just audio. And once again, we have the usual selection of very detailed schematics for it. Once again, looking very ancient. I've always wondered, if you were an engineer in the 1970s, when you were making schematics like this, what does your day actually look like? Because certainly it was my understanding that engineers weren't using computer-aided stuff until more like the 1980s. So I don't know how they were actually producing these sheets. There must have been some. I can't imagine they would have been on mainframe computers, surely. I don't know. Now we do actually have possibly a date on here. No, maybe not on this one. I'm just trying to see anything that obviously looks like a date. I don't. Normally with the Philips sheets, they will have a date on them of when it was actually drawn. Here we go. We have datum. I think that could mean date. In English, that doesn't necessarily mean date, but maybe it might mean date in German. But interestingly here we actually have the late 80s as a date, which just seems a bit unexpected. That just seems far too close to the release date of the EMFP. So I don't know. Yeah, well, maybe that is really when they were actually, when this was designed in 1987, this piece of equipment. So there's actually revisions on here. So we've got A in 87 and B in 88. So that would mean this thing didn't come out until like 10 years after the equivalent Philips unit, which this is interesting that Rohde and Schwarz managed to capture so much market in such a short space of time. And more of it. So yeah, I think we get the idea here. And there's the power supply. Oh, that's a nice one to have. It's a nice little simple one, but this is the one bit that went wrong last time. But yeah, we've got a nice schematic and layout, of course, very good. So yeah, that's peace of mind. Now after that, we have the IEC bus interface, which has got, this has got all GPIB commands on here, and I wonder if these are the same commands which my unit accepts. We should test that out actually, because they don't really need to control that over GPIB, but it's always nice to know how to do it. And there's the actual interface module, which will be different, because for mine it's on the control board. This is, it appears to have a separate module for it. Yeah, I don't have a module like that in my unit. So yeah, that's pretty much it. There's kind of, what's else? Very sticky section with some definitions in the back of here, which are not really all that interesting. So yeah, there's a quick flip through the manual, and so it's a bit, well, I think it's a bit silly, but say for me it's always really exciting to find these manuals, and I always really enjoy flipping through them. They're just so interesting and so beautiful. So you just don't get documentation like this for test equipment these days. You usually just get a kind of operator's manual, which might be satisfactory, but to see an actual schematic, you just don't really see that anymore. Sadly, because that's just the way the economics of the industry went. So yeah, let's close that up and move on. So next up I'm going to address some questions and valid criticisms which came up about the practical demonstration in the previous video. Now this time around I've assembled a slightly different test setup, so we've got a more up-to-date modulator and we also have a different test pattern generator. I'll explain why those changes were made in a minute. Now the first question was around demodulation. Now in that demonstration we left off with all of the various layers of filtering and correction all peeled back, and we were running in synchronous demodulation mode, and we found that the output signal was extremely clean, like almost indistinguishable from the output of the test pattern generator. And certainly that dispels the myth that running through RF is somehow inferior and deteriorates the quality of the signal. That's just not necessarily the case. Under the right conditions it can be extremely clean. And we don't necessarily need these massive pieces of equipment to create those conditions, but if we had consumer equipment, we of course have to open it up and modify it, whereas here we can just push buttons to make things happen, which is quite nice. Now anyway, the question was what happens when we run this, in this scenario, in the envelope detector mode, because that's not actually something which I demonstrated. So what we'll do is switch over to that now and have a look. So in our synchronous mode, if we have a look at the displays, the signal looks really, really nice, but for the chrominance, we do have this little bit of jitter here, which is coming from the PLL in the synchronous demodulator in this receiver. Now if we have a look at our luminance, it looks really, really nice. That's exactly what it's supposed to look like. So if we put it into envelope mode, we're going to see some differences. Now first of all, on our luminance here, we can see that straight away it's not all that great. It's not, that's not correct. So this is what it's supposed to look like, whereas this is wrong. I would say quite substantially wrong. But for our chrominance, actually the envelope is, this looks really, really nice here. So the only real problem we've got is there's a little bit of an arc on the transition between white and yellow, which is, that's quite minor, but yeah, it's probably not all that ideal. The jitter which we saw for synchronous mode is completely gone. It's this really nice, clean and stable signal. So yeah, that's the difference between those two. It's not all that much for chrominance, but the luminance, switching off the SAW filter and the double sideband, that doesn't unfortunately put the envelope detector in a better situation. Now the next comment which came in via email was around what I talked about in the introduction of the previous video. I made the assertion that envelope detectors were perfectly fine for monochrome television. It was really only synchronous that needed color. So that's what I said, but I didn't actually demonstrate it. Now the test pattern generator I had on the stack at the time, it turns out it can't even generate a monochrome staircase, so that's why I got out this one here, because it's much more flexible. So what we'll do is put it back into synchronous mode, and what we're going to do is switch off the color difference signals, and this is just basically going to give us a monochrome staircase instead of the color bars. So we'll switch them both off. There's one and the other, and we'll switch off the burst as well, just so we're really, really properly monochrome. So we've just got our monochrome staircase here. Now we're presently in synchronous mode, so if we switch back to the envelope detector, no difference whatsoever. So yeah, it is in fact the chrominance which really upsets the envelope detector. So if we switch it back on now, we can see, yeah, it messes it up pretty badly. I'll turn on the burst because our vectorscope has no idea what it's doing. So yeah, there it is. So back in the days of monochrome television, envelope detectors were perfectly fine and arguably superior to synchronous. Now while I have all of this equipment out, there was an additional observation I made which brings one of the assertions I made in the previous video into disrepute. Now what I said was that in order to achieve this really clean result, that you have to switch off the SAW filter in the receiver, which means that we are demodulating a double sideband instead of a single sideband. But it turns out that's not actually the case. So if we go into the SAW filter menu and we switch it off or on, we can see that it doesn't make a lick of difference. Now what does make a difference is whether or not the VSB filter is enabled at the transmitter. So if we turn that back on, then we can see we get some distortion on the chrominance. However, It is significantly less than the previous demo, and that's because this time around we are using the PM5680, which is probably about a decade or more newer than the modulator we were looking at last time, and it seems to have a substantially more accurate VSB filter. And certainly from what little documentation I have seen for this unit, Philips certainly were blowing their horn about the performance of it, so we must assume that it must be pretty good. But anyway, that's it for the video demonstrations. The only other thing we we can do just for fun here, now this is actually an A2 stereo model, so we can actually switch that back on. So let's get into the right situation here. Turn the sound trap on. We'll turn the sound carrier on and turn it into test mode. So we've actually got some output. Put that to stereo. What am I missing here? Oh, there we go. It's just coming to life. So all of our sound areas have gone off, and we've got stereo here. So we can push the button on here, go to dual, and switch like that. So yeah, as I say, we did demonstrate all this back in video number 3. But it's pretty cool to see it running here, and this receiver actually has a stereo output. Yeah, thumbs up to that, Rohde and Schwarz. So that big A2 stereo tester, which we saw back in video number 3, infuriatingly, it only has a mono output. It's like, come on, Rohde and Schwarz. It's like all this big, heavy, like 15-kilo piece of equipment, and you couldn't even give me a stereo output. It's not actually necessary for testing, but certainly for me, if I just want to play around and hook up a pair of speakers, it's quite nice to actually have stereo. But anyway, that's it for this demonstration. Now the last thing we're going to do is pop open the digital control module and have a look at what's inside there. Now I actually skipped over this in the previous video because I didn't think it would be all that interesting, but I've spotted something in the service manual for the EMFT which is hinting that there might be something very interesting under here. Alright, we're in. Let's see if we can get this cover off here. Now, it was actually a bit of a job to get to all of the relevant screws, but I think we've got them all out, so we should be able to shimmy this thing out of here by some kind of awkward maneuvering. Oh, there we go. Got it. Yeah, this one is described as processor. Whereas the one from the predecessor is described as a synthesizer, so it's definitely different, alright? Alright, what have we got here? Oh, yes! So this is exactly what I wanted to find. So what we have here is an Intel 186, that's it right there, that's the CPU for this unit. Now this is a rather interesting thing to find because the 186 is, this is a CPU which ostensibly sits between the Intel 8086, that's the processor that was used in the original IBM PS2, I can't remember the model number off the top of my head, and on the other end of it you have the Intel 286 which was used in various PCs and an enormous number of PC compatibles. But whatever happened to the 186, that's a CPU you don't really hear of very often. Well, the deal was that it was an early system on chips, so rather than having to have a huge motherboard with hundreds of chips all over it, and it had quite a lot of peripherals built into it. But the catch was that the built-in peripherals are not PC compatible. Now that wasn't Intel being dicks. The IBM PC was originally designed in secret, while Intel were designing this at the same time. So when they were designing this chip, they didn't even know about PC compatibility. It just wasn't really a thing. Now I believe it was possible to use it in a PC with some torturous hacks, but so it was very seldomly ever done. This is actually the sort of application it was designed for, this kind of embedded type use. So yeah, you can actually put together a system with relatively few external chips, but of course we do have various things in here. So these 8255s, these are Intel, basically GPIO chips. You just you put them on a bus and then you can use them to control stuff. So those will be going out to all of the many different digital control lines throughout the unit. And yeah, other than that, there's not really a lot else going on here. We've got just some very basic logic chips on here. We've got some EPROMs down there, so I'll dump those out while I've got this open. Some SRAMs and Looks like we've got a GPIB interface chip down the end there, and frankly, bugger all else. So yeah, that's what they've basically done. The GPIB interface of the predecessor had this on here. This is why I was curious to pop this open, because I wonder if there might be one in here. So they basically just combined the digital control of the old unit with the GPIB interface and just mashed the two together basically and made, frankly, a much more intelligent control unit with a lot less components. So yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad they opened that up. Well, that is it for today's video, and I cannot stress enough how satisfying it is to actually see this manual. Now, unfortunately, it's not the manual for this piece of equipment here. I do hope to find that someday, and certainly if any viewers out there have either got a copy of it, or even if you just spot one somewhere for sale, just let me know about it, and yeah, I'd be definitely happy to hear from you, and certainly I'll try to scan it. However, I think probably most of it is going to be the same as the manual we've seen here, except for maybe just a couple of chapters. But anyway, that's all for today's video, and as always, thanks for watching.